The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and the guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shane, and today for you guys, I have a fascinating conversation with the one, the only, Timothy Renner from the Strange Familiars podcast. And not only do we dive into the spooky, but we also, of course, dive into the cryptid, and we dive into a little bit more real world with his most recent book, diving into a bunch of fascinating lives of a bunch of different hermits who lived a little bit earlier in the century. But I definitely think that you guys are going to enjoy the extent of this conversation and all of the interesting stuff that we dive into that he, of course, covers throughout all of his books. But before we get into this one today, of course, just got a couple of quick news and updates. First and foremost, the next live Bizarre Inquiries will be happening on May 1st on the Open Minds Media YouTube, and that'll be happening around 7:15 p.m. EST. And of course, we'll be giving out some more information on that as we get a bit closer through social media. But for anybody who is interested in showing up, make sure you guys mark it on your calendars. And if you guys have any clips, questions, articles, any of that you guys would like to send in before then, make sure you guys send it in so that we can make sure we make reference to it on the show and hopefully dive into it. And if we don't get to it on this episode, of course, we will save it for a future episode. And of course, talking about live shows on the Open Minds Media YouTube, as I had announced on a couple of the previous shows, I will be now doing the live shows on the Open Minds Media YouTube of Inquiries of Our Reality and Bizarre Encounters. So if anybody is interested in coming to any of those, I will be posting a schedule in the beginning of the week so that everybody will know what days of the week we will be going live. It is always, of course, subject to change, and I'll hopefully try to keep up with that on social media, but I'll try to post individual days, but no matter what, you guys will have that schedule in the beginning of the week. And rather than taking the lives off directly, I'll probably leave them up for like a month or so, and then I'll probably take them down, and then I'll move them over to the Patreon. And while the Patreon's under construction, that's the next bit of news that I wanted to get to. I'm going to try to put more onto the YouTube for now, but for anybody that is a Patreon member, as you guys hopefully saw last week when I did a post, it is currently under construction. I have a lot of new ideas that I want to bring into it, but for anybody that is a current member, hopefully you stick with us for the time being, and hopefully there will be a lot of new stuff coming within the next month or so. And for anybody else that isn't already a member, hopefully check back with us in about a month or so. I'm sure that I will be popping on the show and letting everybody know all of the new benefits and new stuff that I have in mind, working on behind the scenes to put onto the Patreon and stuff like that. But there's going to be a lot of really cool, exciting stuff going on over there, so you make sure you guys keep tabs on that, of course. And one last thing before we get into the show, if anyone is interested in being a guest on the show, sharing their experiences or encounters, or contacting me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can email me at inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com. Or if you guys want, you guys can call or text into the Open Minds Media hotline number, and that number is 313-364-1551. And if you guys didn't catch that, it is also available down in the show notes so that you guys can find it quick and easy. And every single thing that I mentioned and will mention throughout the show is all available in the link tree, which of course is available again down in that show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, author, illustrator, podcaster, and paranormal explorer, Timothy Renner. How's it going today, man?
It's going well. How you doing?
Not too bad. Absolute pleasure to get you on the show. I don't know how I've dodged around getting on the show for 3 years, but I'm glad that we finally came around to it after me seeing you around for 3 years now and somehow never sparking up a conversation.
Well, Better late than never. But
Ain't that the truth? I mean, at least it comes around at some point. I'm one of those people. I like to believe that everything happens for a reason or happens when it's supposed to happen. So I don't necessarily force everything. Like, when it comes around, and usually it ends up being a great conversation. So that's all I care.
Oh, yeah. No, I've had my show since 2016, and, there's people that I'm great friends with that I haven't had on as guests, that are involved in this stuff. So, you'll get around to it. I'll get around to it. Everybody will have their turn eventually.
Ain't that the truth? And for anybody that may not be familiar with what you do exactly, who you are, and all of the stuff that you happen to do, because you're obviously a man of many titles, as people could kind of tell from the intro. Why don't you let everybody know a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what Strange Familiars is? Sure.
So, I was born in what I call the sort of a golden age of Bigfoot. Early 1970s. I was growing up, and there was Legend of Boggy Creek in the movie theaters and In Search of on TV, and the Patterson-Gimlin film had just been filmed a few years before I was born. And all that was just kind of in the air and in pop culture and stuff, and I became absolutely fascinated with it. Never had any Bigfoot experiences when I was young or anything that could be thrown into that category. Did have some UFO stuff, but for some reason that didn't catch my imagination, even though I'd seen a UFO. Didn't catch my imagination the way Bigfoot did. And I just loved Bigfoot. Grew up a little bit, found girls in punk rock, and, I was too cool for Bigfoot at that time. And life goes on, wife and kids, and kids get a little bit older, and eventually I'm like, hey, what's going on with Bigfoot? I hadn't been paying attention. I did an internet search, and things kept going just because I stopped. The Bigfoot world kept on, and I caught up with that and other aspects of the paranormal, and started writing some articles, and eventually turned into some books and a podcast. And here I am. The way I like to do it is I like to, as much as possible, go to the places where people experience things, whether I meet people there that have had experiences, or this is a area of, quote unquote, high strangeness or whatever it is, and go there and see what happens. And sometimes I've had some pretty amazing things happen. Other times, you go and nothing happens. The stuff won't dance for you, You never know what you're going to get, but I've had some great experiences doing that. With Strange Familiars, my main goal was to do that, was to go to these places and record these shows on site. But obviously, because you can't make things up, and I'm not in the business of, like some of these ghost hunting shows where there's always a demon.
I got scratched.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll go to places and nothing happens. So I can't make a weekly show out of that, and we might go to 10 or even 15 or 20 different outings before something worth, reporting on or recording happens. So I started interviewing witnesses, the next best thing, have people tell me their experiences and see what they experienced and how it went, and try to get it direct from the source. So that's what Strange Familiars is about, those two things. And my books, I started writing on local paranormal stuff, kind of local folklore, expanded to Bigfoot. And probably my most popular books are I co-authored with Joshua Cutchin, Where the Footprints End, Volumes 1 and 2, High Strangeness and the Bigfoot Phenomena. And then but I've done a number of other books on different paranormal topics. And then most recently, I have released I've Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories. It's my first book that's not paranormal in focus. It's a sort of biography of a bunch of different hermits.
Say, I would love to dive into some of the stuff that you end up covering in your books, but of course I have to kind of dive back to some of your experiences a little bit. You had mentioned that you'd had a UFO experience when you were a kid, and it didn't necessarily make that connection for you. I feel like for a lot of people, you see something off in the sky, and it's not something that's touchable necessarily, but when you get into like Bigfoot, for example, like you can get out in the woods, you feel like you can actually really like get out there and do something rather than just investigating something where it has been, but it's not necessarily there anymore. So you kind of need that real world connection. But at least for like your UFO experience, I'm assuming it wasn't anything super crazy, but I'd love to hear about it and some of the other experiences that kind of led up to you wanting to just full blown get into all this stuff.
Yeah. So I was about 8 years old. And my mom woke me up. I was asleep. My mom woke me up and said, "Do you want to see a UFO?" What 8-year-old kid's going to say? "No, Mom, I don't. Let me get back to sleep." Of course I want to see a UFO. So she took me outside, and I was with one of my brothers and one sister rather. And we were watching what looked like your standard sort of disc hover above the trees on the horizon outside of our house. And I was standing in the driveway, and we watched it a good long time. It was just hovering there. It had lights that looked like they rotated around the craft, different color lights to my memory. And eventually, everyone else got bored. And I said, "Well, I want to stay out and watch." And that might sound unusual, an 8-year-old kid, but we lived on a farm, and I had a very, very protective dog that was with me all the time. He was like my best friend. There was no kids my age in the neighborhood. I grew up with this dog. We grew up together, and he was very protective of me and would not let anybody touch me. So it wasn't really that big a deal. Plus, I had, it was a farm. There wasn't, a ton of people around.
Good old farm dog.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was a great dog. But I stood out there, and the strange thing in my memory, and this might just be my memory, or this might be something weird, is I remember standing in the driveway and watching it for a long time. And then my next memory is being inside and watching it from a window inside. And I don't have any recollection of how I got inside. So that's a bit of strangeness there that I really didn't put together, because I didn't know about things like missing time or anything like that when I was a kid. It was just, it was later in life when I was looking back on it, and I realized I have no memory of going back in the house. I was out there alone with the dog, and then I'm looking at it through the window. So I don't know, could just be, it's been a long time, could just be my memory, or there could be something weird there.
I talked to a few people recently who actually are also writers in the community, Nomar Slevik being one of them. And it's funny, a bunch of you guys seem to have had these UFO experiences when you were a kid, but you guys didn't really like chalk it up to much at the time. But you look back at it as an adult and you notice that you had these like missing time / maybe even screen memory type scenarios. Because I know for him, for example, he was looking at like a weird cloud outside of his window, and the next thing he knows, he's going to bed, or he's waking up the next morning. He doesn't remember going to bed, anything on the between. And it's like, for most kids, you'd assume if you're seeing something really, really weird that you just remember every single aspect of it. So if you don't, or you're looking at something weird, next thing you know, you're waking up in the morning or you're going to bed, and you just stopped looking at it. I don't know, you don't think about it much as a kid, but when you get older, you really know that there's something weird there. And I'm kind of curious if it, in a weird way, this subconsciously kind of set the pace for a lot of people when it comes to writing, because maybe you start to explore stuff in the back of your mind and in your subconscious sooner than maybe other people who didn't have these type of experience would have.
Yeah, maybe. So there were other things that happened as when I got older, in college and just out of college. I was experiencing this quote unquote abduction phenomenon, and I want to put that in quotes because I don't think I ever left my bed. I don't think I was actually physically abducted. I think these are out-of-body experiences that happened. And to me, it's, in a way, a lot scarier that these things can pull you out of your body than being physically kidnapped in some way. And I did have screen memories associated with those. So that those experiences sort of made me look back at these earlier experiences. And I have other things like a recurring dream that, in my child mind was about witches, but I swear I was awake. I called it a dream my entire life because I didn't know what else to call it, because it happened again and again, but I was awake and I could hear these three, like I said, in my child mind, I called them witches, but they were just, I never saw them. I could hear them downstairs, and they were speaking a language I couldn't understand. And I just knew I had to be quiet, and I didn't want them to know I was awake. So things like that, I had that dream probably not 10 times, but like maybe 5 or 6, I don't know. And looking back, you know, I'm like, wow, was that the beginning of all this stuff? And, you know, like I said, in my childlike mind, wouldn't have known about alien abductions, you know, when I called it, you know, for some reason I called them witches.
Especially like the non-physical ones too, because that seems to be a semi-recent phenomenon that a lot of people are talking about, where people aren't getting like straight up abducted, but rather like they're getting like astral projected somewhere else, or their consciousness is getting like removed from their body somehow. Because like you kind of mentioned, that's almost scarier because you can't fight that because it's not physical. It's like you can't escape it. It's no matter where you are. Like people have talked about these experiences. They'll get like pulled through their bedroom ceiling. They'll get pulled out of wherever. Like it's totally different when you're dealing with a non-physical world, and it's just a whole heightened state of fear that I don't think most people, you can try to comprehend it, but you can't really fully comprehend it unless you've existed in that astral realm and had a high moment of fear.
Yeah, it's very strange and upset me for a long time, and you know, kind of really kind of felt like I was living with a shadow over me in a sense. And you know, I figured out how to stop it, and I could stop it every time now. So it's people don't like, you know, look, and when I say this again, I'm going to say what I say, but at the same time, people have to understand I'm not saying that these things are demons, and I don't believe they are, as a matter of fact. But I can stop it with the Hail Mary every single time. All I have to do is start saying the Hail Mary, and I'm awake and back in my bed. And what does that tell me about it? It tells me that it recognizes belief in some way, because I've read about other people who, it doesn't matter their religion. I happen to be Catholic, but it doesn't matter. Wiccans can, you know, say Wiccan things, and Jewish people can say, you know, Jewish prayers, and you know, Protestants and Muslims across the board. It works for everybody. So, you know, this isn't me saying that they're demons. This isn't me saying that, you know, I have the right religion. Only that there seems to be an element of belief about this. They either respect belief or they're not allowed to mess with that. I don't know what it is, but I can stop it every time. And I've read plenty of instances of other people who can stop it the same way. It's a very curious thing, very strange, but yeah. And I do not think they're demons. I think it's a piss poor shape for a demon to take. Same as Bigfoot. You want to cause me problems? Take the form of a beautiful woman. You cause me plenty of problems. Take the form of a big hairy ape in the woods. Whatever. You're not bothering me. Not going to get me to change anything.
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. But in the meantime, don't forget to follow Inquiries of Our Reality on Instagram and Facebook. And don't forget to check out Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok. I'd love to hear from you guys, so feel free to leave a comment or spark up a conversation. I love getting to know you guys. And now back to the show.
I definitely debate this all the time on the show, that I think that it's always a matter of language also when it comes to a lot of this stuff, that, you know, we could be speaking about the same things, but they've existed with different names throughout times. That, sure, you know, we're using the term demon more at this point as like an archetype more than anything, because I think that there was like a literal defined what a demon is in the Bible at one point, but now it's kind of gotten to a point where, you know, because of like you've mentioned earlier, like ghost hunter shows, everything else, that anything that goes bump in the night or that's, you know, something scary ends up getting slapped the label demon on it. But, you know, if you're looking at like the whole biblical paradigm from, I guess, multiple perspectives, and it depends on which way you kind of want to lean, they both kind of make sense. You know, you could get into like the ancient aliens theory that, you know, what we're viewing as this religion is actually these ancient beings and we're just calling them by a different name. Or on the flip side of it, you know, there is actually all of the biblical concept of everything, and we're just relabeling these things for something else that we know more of a context with. But I definitely think it's just like a back and forth with a matter of language, that a lot of the time, you know, we're not using a lot of these definitions and words properly for a lot of this stuff, because as humans, we like to categorize things. And a lot of these things I think that we're dealing with aren't necessarily that easily put into a category as we would like them to be.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure like it's easy for people to say if it's a negative entity, and I do believe there are negative entities out there. You know, I think there's a whole ecosystem of entities out there, good, bad, and everything in between. But yeah, I can understand people. It's like, oh, it's on the negative side. I'm just going to call it a demon, and I reserve that term for the actual like fallen angel kind of thing, something of that would be a real problem, I think.
I mean, even on the flip side too, I mean, people talking about these light beings and angels like they're the same thing. I think that there could definitely be a difference within them. Like prime example, Bledsoe, that whole thing, there's a lot of people that like to interpret that as an angelic encounter, but I definitely think that there's a spectrum of these beings, that it's not just every single light being is an angel. There's a spectrum of different types of light beings, and you may not be dealing with the same one every single time, but you're still going to slap the label angel on it because that's what makes the most sense with your context.
Yeah, certainly.
But kind of I'd love to start diving into some of your books. And I always like to take a moment on the show to take a spot to bring up some folklore that may be forgotten if it wasn't for that. And I'm sure that with your books that you've probably dived into a lot of stuff that you may be the only person that's specifically written about this specific thing. And I like to always take a chance to spotlight some of those encounters just for the sake of bringing them to a new medium and making sure that they stay in the mindset of the community.
Oh, geez. Well, probably the biggest revelation that I was ever able to write about, and the most surprising thing, I think, to a lot of people, including my co-author. So he said, there's no way you're writing a chapter on this. There's no way you're going to get a chapter out of this, is the connection between Bigfoot and women in white spirits, which really came out of one story on Sasquatch Chronicles caught my interest. It's a story that listeners to Sasquatch Chronicles know from way back. It was called they call it the Two Brothers. I think the actual episode was We Need Help or something like that. There's these guys talking about these different Bigfoot entities that were basically harassing them, these two brothers on their property. But Wes did a follow-up show on that, and he said that they also had this strange entity, this weird old woman in white who walks around. And she was wearing shoes that looked like they were too big for her feet, like clown shoes. And she was, she would go up, they would hear these creatures like howling on the ridge, and this lady would walk up and they thought like, oh, she's dead. She went where these creatures are, and she seemed to have no fear of them. And, they confronted her, and this is just what they reported, I'm saying. And they tried to stop her and ask her, what she was doing after she came back off the ridge the following day. They thought, these creatures would have killed her. And she wouldn't talk to him until I think one of the brothers said, I command you to stop. And she turned and looked at him, gave him a smile, and disappeared, they said. Very strange thing. But then in the Sasquatch Chronicles chat room, people kept saying, you know what? I saw a weird woman who was wearing white, and then I drove down the road and saw Bigfoot. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. So that got my interest up, and I started looking around, and even locally, I was finding instances. So it'd be these legends of women in white, and then Bigfoot sightings right next to them. Like, okay, that's really, really interesting. But is it enough for a chapter? And then I started digging, and I found, so there's women in white legends in Austria, and associated with one of the royal families there, and they would see this. It was a sort of a portent of death. And one of the names of one of these women in white was Ursula, I believe, which is a sort of medieval version of Perchta, who was, they call her a goddess. She was not really a goddess, more like one of these like fairy kind of creatures. Perchta was a woman in white. She could appear as either young and beautiful or old and hag-like. She had one or both feet were giant bird feet, which is extremely meaningful if you're in terms of Bigfoot. If you think about those three-toed tracks that no one can explain, there you go. Giant bird feet. And also, if you think about the woman from the Sasquatch Chronicles, the shoes too big for her feet she was wearing. But the most interesting thing about Perchta is she has a retinue, one of which is the Heimchen, souls of dead children, which she's lured off into the woods. And these take the forms of orbs, lights that appear in the woods. And the second part of her retinue are the Perchten, hairy wild men that follow her around. So this goes back to, the earliest mythology and folklore in Europe. But extending it from there, I have found wild men in Russia that have women in white as their wife. The apple tree man in England is a wild man of the orchards, who helps him patrol the orchards, an old woman in white. In Italy, in Northern Africa, in the United States, all over the world, these Bigfoot, these wild man entities, these big hairy things are associated with either a white counterpart that's also a white creature, or a white woman, an old woman in white, often. Everywhere except I haven't found one yet, and I'm sure I'm going to find it. I haven't found one from the Far East yet. But I truly believe there's going to be a legend that comes out that I'll find eventually. But pretty much everywhere else in the world, I've tracked down these women in white and Bigfoot legends, and it's amazing. It's just they go together somehow. Don't know why.
See, the stuff in the Middle East, though, I almost wonder if it doesn't seem like there's too many just straight up Sasquatch encounters, but it seems like if you're kind of following somewhat of like the biblical theory in line with Sasquatch, then maybe the giants might kind of play like a counterpart with it, where maybe there might be some like women in white sightings seen around like some of these weird giant sightings and everything in the Middle East. But at that point, is it almost
I'm certain I've found something from the Middle East. It's just from like nothing from China or Japan or, in the Far East like that. There's one in India I found. It's really ubiquitous all over the world. It's, I trust that I'll find more. And people all the time write me with examples, or, who have read the book, like, hey, have you run into this one? It's just folklore all over the world. It's wild.
Say, I've never actually heard that connection before, but of course, going to the orbs, that's always commonplace when you hear about Sasquatch, and particularly, it always seems to be the blue orbs for whatever reason. And I know a lot of people have gotten kind of into the quantum Bigfoot theory as far as like what those blue orbs could be, possibly Bigfoot like compressing himself to be able to transverse different dimensions, but it almost kind of makes more sense with this whole idea about there being like a fey presence to the woods, because with a lot of Sasquatch stuff, there's a lot of these like weird reminiscent like fey type encounters that go along with it. And again, that would almost seem like it would make more sense if, the fey counterpart that's going along with Sasquatch isn't necessarily Sasquatch himself, but this other female figure that is also around Sasquatch.
Yeah, there's quantum physics is interesting, but this quote was attributed to me by my co-author, but I did not. I wish I said this. This is a brilliant quote, but it is not, in fact, me. I forget where it comes from. But someone who's smarter than I once said, if you think you understand quantum physics, you do not understand quantum physics. So it's fun to play around with as a theory, but my heart's in folklore, and I think when I first got into this, the flesh and blood Bigfoot guys, especially, would folklore was a dirty word. They'd say it folklore, like they smelled something bad when they were saying it. Oh, that's just folklore. Folklore is the way our ancestors talked about this stuff that we love, and they've passed it down to us. And it's a big game of whispering down the lane, so things get exaggerated. Something that was maybe 9 feet high becomes 27 feet high, 30 feet high. And over time, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But they tell us what these things were in a sense, as, not a full explanation, but they place them in the world, and they tell us how to deal with them most often. And, as a musician, I spent a lot of time in traditional folk music, and there's a line in traditional folk music. This is, all folk songs are true. Traditional folk songs. Some of them that applies literally, but I think for the most part they mean like the spirit of it is true, and that they are all passing down information. And sometimes these folk tales will pass down information like, hey, don't eat that plant because it's going to kill you. Hey, that plant might be good to heal you. That might be good for a cut or whatever. And other times they're passing down information like, hey, this is like, don't follow the lights into the woods. Probably not a good idea. Things like that, the weird lights, leave them alone, let them be. And I think that is good information that people have written off. So my heart goes to folklore. Like, what did our ancestors say about this stuff? Because they were around and dealing with this stuff. And I think this stuff's been right beside us for as long as we've been here.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I mean, usually with a lot of my research, what I try to do is like, you dive into the folklore and then you kind of find the connecting pieces between all of it, because of course there's going to be some fluff on it, but the main stuff that you see just repeat through every single bit of folklore you see around Sasquatch around the world, then you know that there's probably something to it. And I mean, one of those things usually is people claiming to see these like orbs or lights and different things that around them. So, maybe they're connected directly, maybe they're not, but regardless of that, there is something to it. And people were trying to explain it in the best language they had at the time. And that's the other thing that people got to think about is that, we may have the terminology to be able to say like, oh, this is what this is in particular. But, back in the day, they didn't have the same context. That's where you get the whole thing with like chariots of fire, for example, for UFOs, is they're using the best language that they can use to just try to describe these things. But when you're looking at it, 200, 300, even 1,000 years later, the initial wording of it sounds ridiculous because you have a better word to describe it now. Like it's almost like taking a piece of technology that we have today and then trying to put an old name for it. Like imagine if somebody from like 1,000 years ago tried to, name a computer, like what kind of ridiculous name would they have came up with for that? Like, and that's what you want to go off of, is just the wording of what they called it. And we're going to throw it all out just because it sounds kind of funny,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, again, not to hit too hard on my fellow researchers who happen to go for the flesh and blood theory. But, one thing I've noticed in terms of like Native American folklore, they love it. They love to say like, oh, yeah, this tribe believes in Bigfoot. But they stop, they'll say, oh, they call it Oma and this and that. And, they think it's just another tribe, just another. But when the Native Americans say, yeah, but he had magic powers. They don't. Oh well, no, they were dumb. They didn't understand. Well, no, they knew exactly what they saw, and they're saying that for a reason. That you can't just take half of it. So yeah, this they believed in it and they thought it was another tribe of humans, and and they think he has magic powers. Okay, yeah. So let's get it all in there. Let's not throw it out. These they knew exactly what they were seeing, and they know the world and how the world works.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a flash. But if you don't like hearing the ads, then I have a solution for you. You can get ad-free and early access to this show and Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $1 a month. That's less than the price of a bag of chips, and it's a great way to support the show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in merch store discounts or premium video versions of the show, then there are a few other tiers with additional benefits and 7-day free trials available. Now let's get back into it.
I mean, even on the positive side of both ends of the research, though, like if you want to really be able to get somewhere with it, you almost need people researching from both sides. Because it's like if everybody wanted to believe in flesh and blood, or everybody wanted to believe in the woo-woo type of Sasquatch or the quantum side of Sasquatch, like you wouldn't be able to have a fully non-biased idea of what's actually happening with the phenomenon, because it has to be looked at from both angles. Like they're doing just for the research by looking at it from two different angles, because everybody wants to try to debate and fight back and forth with each other, but for almost any experiment, it's like you want to have different people with different perspectives that are going to see the experiment in multiple different ways, and in turn you'll end up with the best results. So not if everybody's always in the same camp, like you're always going to have biased information. So it's a good thing that there's a split, in all fairness.
You're kinder than I am. Let's go with that.
And I guess, for the sake of it, we'll try to touch base on a little bit of everything. And I know that for your newest book, it's a little bit something different than this phenomenon, but we'll get into that in a little bit here. But, we've already kind of dived into the UFO stuff. We've dived into some of the Sasquatch stuff. And you also had mentioned that you like to explore into the paranormal. And I'm assuming that you're probably one of those people that, kind of uses that term pretty broad as far as like incorporating Sasquatch and everything with that. But if you have had any paranormal experiences, or you have anything that is kind of interests you as far as like the paranormal goes, diving into weird stories or anything like that, I'd love to be able to touch base on it, so you can get a little bit of everything here.
Yeah, I do think it's all related. I like on my show, I'll just call it the other. It's just a blanket term for all of it: ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot. You talk about the lights that come with Bigfoot. Well, there's lights that come with everything. My friend Soraya from Where Did the Row Go? He's got a great line, which I'm going to steal again. I've stolen it before. He said, if it's a light in an old house, it's a ghost. If it's a light in the woods, it's Bigfoot. If it's a light in the sky, it's a UFO. But they're all lights. And darn if he didn't write about that. Class B Bigfoot phenomena is a 1-to-1 comparison for poltergeist phenomenon. There's no getting around it. It's 1-to-1 comparison. You don't see a creature, you get a bad smell. Bad smells, poltergeist. Get a stone thrown at you, pick it up, it's warm. Same thing happens inside houses. Stones thrown, people pick them up, they're warm. Unknown language, poltergeist encounters. It's knocks, poltergeist encounters. It's a 1-to-1 comparison. So to me, it's really hard to separate that. So it's, at least generally, I think it's all from the same source. I think it's using different channels to get through. I could be wrong. I allow for that. I don't, someone could come and prove me, including with the flesh and blood. They bring a body in tomorrow. They prove me wrong. Look at it. Look, there's a flesh and blood creature. I was wrong. I'll allow for that. But it's just like sort of my gut feeling is that it's all related. There's just too much in common across the board with this stuff. So a lot of my experiences are kind of like high strangeness experiences, which to me are amazing and sort of synchronistic. There's one I talk about often so there's an area I looked into in my first book and continue to go back to this day. I consider myself the lore keeper for this region. It's called Toad Road here in York County, Pennsylvania. And there's a lot of nonsense legends out there on the internet about insane asylums that burnt down and mad doctors and all this. That's all nonsense. Throw it out the window. That all came post-internet, by the way. Before the internet, those legends were not associated with that area. But there are strange legends associated with that area, from ghosts to what sounded, to me, most of them sounded like cryptid stuff. Screams in the woods, people being paced in the woods, dark shapes in the trees, things like this. So that's what got me interested. And again, wrote my first book about it. And one day I was out there with my friend, and I don't think I'd started my podcast yet. I think it was like just before I started the podcast, or maybe right at the beginning, I forget. But it's about I don't know, 2-3 mile stretch of old road. It's closed now, and it's private property. But it's called Toad Road because it was a tow path. It goes by an old creek, and this was navigable water in the 1800s, and they had a tow path there to help pull barges along. So the tow road over time, again, whispering down the lane, became Toad Road. So I was out there with my friend one day, and it's sort of an out and back hike, and I like to do the whole thing. It's like at least once or twice a year. I don't know. Ever since I wrote the book, I feel like I should do that. Like I said, I feel like I'm the lure keeper for that area.
Got to check up on it here and there.
I take very seriously. I do. And we went, and for whatever reason, we went about 3/4 of the way that day, and he wanted to turn around, and I forget why. He just didn't want, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to make anybody do anything they don't want. So we turned around, and on the way back, two strange things happened. One, we ran into what I call the wall of stink. Very much like people describe your standard Bigfoot smell, just the sulfury, BO, rotten flesh kind of smell. And it was across the trail, and you could walk into it and then step out the other side and you wouldn't smell it. You could turn around and step back into it and smell it again. It was the oddest thing. And like I said, it was like a wall. If you can imagine, it's just like a wall of stink across the trail. So we did that a few times. Isn't this weird? We're going back and forth into the wall of stink and out of it. Walked down the trail, and then I found a raccoon skull right in the middle of the trail. It's perfectly clean. Now, that raccoon skull could have been there when we walked in. I absolutely allow for that. But I've been collecting animal skulls since I was a little kid. Like I said, grew up on a farm, always liked to draw them and stuff. I remember the first one my dad gave me was a raccoon skull. So that's, when I was like 10 or something. And I've been collecting them ever since. And I'm very tuned to that color in the woods. So it would be very, very unusual that I would step over a skull and not see it. And this was just laying perfectly in the middle of the path. So isn't that cool? Picked it up, in my pack it goes. Went, said, hey, let's go back and finish this hike next week. Okay. Well, next week comes, and this was like the end of March, the hike. So the next week came, he couldn't do it. And then the following week, he's like, well, I can't do it again. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to go out there and do it because like things are growing up. It's just going to get impassable. This isn't a public, it's all private property. No one should be there kind of thing. It's not a public place. People don't go hiking there. So out I go, I'm by myself, and I get to the place on the trail about where I found the raccoon skull. I don't know if it was the same place or not, but it was roughly that area. And I hear something up ahead. Just a brief, like, couple branch cracks kind of thing. I look up, and I saw something big. I was heading south, and this thing was heading south, and it just took off like a lightning bolt, just boom, like right through, and didn't make another sound. I heard that initial crack, and then no more sounds from this thing. I don't know what it was. It was big. It was gray and black. It was bigger than anything that should be in the woods in York County, Pennsylvania. The first thought that came to my mind was moose, because I'd hiked near my friend's cabin in Massachusetts, and we'd seen a moose, and they have a sort of a different gait than a deer, and it was that weird way it moved. And I thought, oh, that reminded me of a moose. It was not a moose. We don't have moose here. Someone else suggested, oh, maybe it was like a bull elk that came in from northern Pennsylvania or something. You know, if that's the case, still a very weird thing, because we do not have elk here and haven't for hundreds of years. But whatever this thing was, and I don't think it seemed like it was quadrupedal, but it didn't run like a deer or even a moose. It's like that thought came to my head just because it was like, that's the first thought. It was just big and weird. So you can hear me struggling not to. I don't want to say what I saw, right? I don't want to say, and I will never say like, oh, I saw Bigfoot, until I want that face-to-face encounter where I'm looking at it in the eyes and it's looking at me, and I'm like, okay, that's it. So maybe that was it. I don't know. It was big and hairy, too big for anything that should be in the woods, and very quick and very quiet after that initial crack of the branch. I took off after this thing as fast as I could go, which isn't lightning fast. This, like I said, is a real rough trail. There's, thorns, and if this stuff's growing up at this point, this is, into April a little bit, and the thorns and stinging nettle and everything is growing up. But I took off after it, and it wasn't out of bravery. I thought, in fact, later I kind of sat down and thought, what were you doing? Like if something was like trying to lead you, you took the bait, but whatever, I went and I followed this thing for, I'm guessing, I don't know, maybe between a quarter and a half mile. And when I say I followed it, I never saw it or heard it again. I just went in the direction that it went on the path. And I'm stopped in the middle of the path by a skull. And it was at eye level. It was impaled on a branch, a deer skull. Now, could someone have gone down in there? Yeah, they could have, but they would have had to get in there in that week that I wasn't there, because I had gone past that before. Again, people aren't supposed to be in there. They had to either find a perfectly clean deer skull or bring one with them, impale it on the branch, and there was a dried flower like on it, like where the third eye would be. It was a very, very odd. I was looking at photos that I took of it recently. I just remembered that. I don't know why. Like in my book I wrote about it, I didn't really even mention that. It's a very strange aspect of it. And I was, again, stopped in my tracks, not out of fear. I did not, again, some of these, Bigfoot guys are like, oh, that's how they mark their hunting grounds. How do you know? How do you know that? He was trying to tell you to keep out of there. Was he? I don't know, but the feeling that I got, for whatever feelings are worth, was like, oh, you like that little raccoon skull, did you? Well, you're really going to like this. And I did. I put it in my pack. And I didn't finish the hike that day, by the way. I was like so kind of blown away by the sequence of events. I put that in my pack. And again, I wasn't afraid. I was just like, wow. And I left. But the thing with that is it started a period probably 2 years thereabouts where almost every paranormal, Bigfoot or ghosts or anything, I found skulls. Unbelievable amount of skulls I was finding. I had so many skulls. Like, my daughter hates hiking. She hates it. I remember her saying, like, I want to find skulls like you do, Dad. I was like, you got to come out with me. And this was early days of the pandemic. And there's a little walking trail near us. I live in a small town here in Pennsylvania. There's a little walking trail, maybe a couple acres of woods, maybe. And I'm like, well, let's go over there and let's see what we find. Parks were closed and everything. This is, like early days. So we walk over there and we walk, through the trails and didn't find anything. And I said, well, we can't always get one, honey. And literally, as like walking out, the last thing on a log, again, perfectly clean, sat there like if it was sitting there for a fox skull, perfectly clean, sitting there. And my daughter's like, I knew I'd find a skull if I went with you. It blew me away. And I had so many skulls. Again, I've been collecting since I was a kid. And suddenly I have so many, I can't even keep them all. They're all over the inside, outside of the house, everywhere. One Bigfoot witness I met, he had these 3 different locations where things happened. Every location we stopped, I picked up a clean deer skull. He's like, what is it with you? I'm like, dude, I do not know. So it was, and that went on and on and on for, like I said, for a couple years. It was crazy. And, yeah, I don't even know what that is, but it's like this high strangeness thing that went along with this stuff. It was an amazing thing. And, it stopped or slowed down. I don't tend to find them as much anymore. I don't know why. I don't know why it stopped, but it seemed like a period of 2 years. I was just finding them left and right.
That almost kind of makes you wonder if it's just something that they maybe do, or if on the flip side, if you get into the little bit more like spiritual side of Sasquatch, that, maybe they have some type of like communication with each other, that sometimes they seem like they pick specific people out, because it'll be something where, you'll have like a researcher who'll go to this state and that state and this state. And weirdly enough, they'll have some of these like really, really weird, precise things that'll happen in all these different locations, that it almost kind of seems like maybe it could be coincidence, but I'm not one that typically believes in coincidence very often, especially when you're dealing with something that's like in this paradigm of things.
Yeah. It was amazing.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back with that deep conversation you crave. But just a quick reminder, if you'd like to snag some gear for this show, Bizarre Encounters, or one of your favorite cryptids or topics, hop on over to the Open Minds Media merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly. And t-shirts now for the low price of just $15.68 plus shipping. And now let's get back into it.
So we did this one story for the podcast about this guy. He was a furnace master. He ran an iron furnace down in Maryland. And we went down there, and like I said, we try to go to the places that we talk about wherever we can. And we looked and we found there was a nature preserve that kind of backed up to his old property, where his property was. So we could get right up to the back. The furnace master's mansion is still there. It's private property. But through this nature preserve, we could get really close to it. So I figured, well, we'll get as close as we can. We'll go through this nature preserve, and we'll do some recording there, talk about the ghost stories associated with this guy and so forth. And what this guy did was, he supposedly, and this is like the late 1600s, early 1700s, he would dress as a ghost and scare his neighbors. So interesting, right? So we go and recording that, and we're walking back, and again, middle of the woods in this nature preserve, and we come to a clearing, and I see something light colored in the clearing. I pick it up as it was a plastic Halloween skull, right? So here's this paranormal investigation, and I still found a skull. It just was this like goofy plastic Halloween skull. Isn't that funny? Still found a skull, But then one of my listeners pointed out, is like, isn't that appropriate? The guy who used to dress up, as a fake ghost and scare people, and you would find the fake skull on that one. I was like, oh wow, I didn't even put that together.
The irony.
Yeah.
So I guess that might kind of leeway into the little bit of what I want to get into with your most recent book, and it's definitely a high strangeness, but a little bit of a different gear of high strangeness. I know that your most recent book, you'd been diving into some of these hermit stories that you had found. So, I don't know where exactly you want to start with it, but I'd love to kind of give people a range of what they're going to find in your book and maybe some of your favorite stories in the book.
Sure. Yeah, it's called I've Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories. And it's over 30 hermits I researched and did biographies for. There's 37 chapters, but there's a couple hermits in a couple of the chapters, so probably close to 40 hermits. Their biographies are in the book. Everyone, but I think two or three of the hermits I write about, there's no photos of them. All the other ones you can see photos of the actual hermits from my collection. These are all, mostly from the late 1800s, early 1900s era. Basically, when I was, I wanted to write a book about hermits, my wife started it. She got me this postcard, and this is when I was writing two books on historical Bigfoot sightings, Bigfoot in Pennsylvania and Bigfoot West Coast Wildmen, which collect newspaper articles from the 1800s up to the 1920s about what I feel are Bigfoot. They called them Wildmen back then, but I truly believe most of these articles refer to Bigfoot that are in these books. And so she gets this photo of this hermit and she puts it down on my desk. She says, "Oh, you like Wildmen? Here's a Wildman for you." And this was William Woodruff of Colebrook River, Connecticut. The postcard said, Billy Woodruff, Colebrook River, Connecticut. And I thought, oh, that's neat. Just a guy. And I think he's wearing, dirty clothes and a walking stick and big beard and stuff. So, oh, that's neat. Kind of let it shift under if you could see my desk here, you'd see like all these papers for research and things that need to be scanned in and all that. So it got shifted under that pile, over time. And some months go by, and eventually it's shifted to the top again. And I had a few minutes that day, and I'm like, oh, let me look up this guy. And I type in, Billy Woodruff, Colebrook River, Connecticut, and all of these stories start coming up about this guy. It's a fascinating guy. Supposedly had a love interest who was a little bit younger than him. She spurned him, and he took a vow of silence after that and went off to live alone as a hermit. This is sort of the legend. And never spoke again. He did speak again, but very, very few times. He did not speak often. So he might have had a vow of silence, or he might have had a practical vow of silence. Basically, he lived alone. But he grew hollyhocks on his property, which were said to be in his. The woman who spurned him was Agatha Hinsdale. That was supposed to be her favorite flower. So he grew hollyhocks, and he would hand them to people. He lived on the road between Colebrook River and Winsted, Connecticut. He'd hand these flowers out to people when they passed his place. Never spoke a word to them. Was he shy, or did he have a vow of silence? But eventually, over time, he, there's sort of the romanticized version. He lights his shack on fire. He's holding this daguerre-type photo of his lost love, and he burns himself in the flames. Probably the less romantic version is probably what actually happened, and that the other version is he was smoking his pipe and a spark went and hit his beard and caught his beard and his clothes on fire. This was in February. His house burned down. He was badly burned, walked 2 or 3 miles in the snow in stocking feet to his next nearest neighbor, ended up in the hospital and died a couple months later, probably a very miserable death. If you know anything about bad burns, it's not a pleasant way to go. But super interesting guy, this vow of silence, and there's this, this legend of him. Like, I think the newspaper said he died like Odin, like a New World Odin, in the flames, being carried by the Valkyries off to Valhalla or something.
Like a phoenix, he rises.
yeah. Super interesting story. But then, as I'm reading more about this synchronicity kicks in with this story. At the same time, he was living there in Winsted, which is 8 miles away from him, 7 or 8 miles. They're having a wild man scare. And there's some pretty intense reports on the Winstead Wildmen. People are like whole carriage fulls of people are unloading on this thing with guns and having no effect. It's chasing people out of the woods. It's there's pretty intense encounters with this Winstead Wildman. The stories are popping up in the papers all around the area at the same time he's living in this cabin up there. I thought, wow, that's neat. And then I came across one story where they said somebody was on the road between Colebrook River and Winstead, and they thought the wild man was coming out of the woods. And they described him. They said, this guy came out of the woods. He was wearing these like ragged clothes, and he had a big beard, and he was holding something in his hand. It was probably William Woodruff. I thought, isn't that amazing? Like, here I am doing all this like wild man research, and the first hermit that I start to research has a connection to the wild man research. So that kicked me off, and I did his story first on Strange Familiars, just as an experiment. Like, I don't know if people are going to like this or not. We do like forgotten history sometimes as a part of the stuff we do, and people seem to like it. So I did another hermit and another and another. Eventually I said, well, I should write a book. And it was 3 years of research. It's way different kind of research than doing paranormal stuff. These were real people who lived at a real time and died at a specific time, and they lived in a specific place. And all of this stuff can be, checked on census records. And for most of them, some of them are complete mysteries, but a lot of these guys turn up on census records, and, they had a job until, whatever point they decided to be a hermit. So they're listed this place and that place, and you can kind of track them a good bit. But like I said, it's a different kind of research, and it takes a lot longer because you never know when you're done with these guys and women, with these folks. Because you always like, did I find every story about this guy? And I probably didn't. Honestly, I'll probably find more stories about him, but eventually you have to say, okay, I think I found everything on that one, and move on to the next one. But it took a long time, to 3 years of research and illustration for that book. But I'm very happy with it. It's my favorite illustrations I've gotten in any of my books so far. And like I said, a different kind of thing. And I think it's a real sort of a love letter to these people who wanted to live alone.
I mean, even on the other side too, they always get into some really interesting things. Like, there was one that I'd heard about that was like the leather man who made this like leather suit and would just basically walk in circles and stuff. So it's like, they wanted to go off and do their own thing, but at the same time, it almost kind of seems like subconsciously, like maybe they wanted to kind of make their mark on history. So it's kind of nice to know that, even if you go off and live as a hermit, that maybe one day somebody might find your story interesting and might decide to write about you one day. But in the process of it, I'm kind of curious, have you been able to kind of correlate maybe some of these old like Depression era wild men Sasquatch stories with maybe some of these people? Because I know like the Monroe Monster from Michigan, for example, and like the Ohio Grassman, there's a lot of people that debate whether or not those were actual people that just tried to like make shelters and stuff out in the middle of nowhere, or if they were actually Sasquatch. But have you been able to kind of correlate anything like that?
Well, the one with William Woodruff, the first one I talked about, there was an explicit connection there, obviously. And, I was like, oh, that's awesome. But honestly, with the rest of them, I've been so busy just trying to get their stories down that I didn't have like cross-reference. I would think like most of these guys and women, most of them are New England based, which is itself a mystery. To me, like, if you're on a hermit, that's a very cold place. But probably better than 50% of the hermits in the book are New England. So I'm sure there's more correlations there, and I'm sure more than once a hermit has been mistaken for a Bigfoot. I'm certain of it, just as mountain men were and so forth. But no, that's the only explicit connection I found. But I haven't really checked in that much to it otherwise.
I'm kind of curious if you continued on this research, if maybe you'll find somebody that's like in one of these areas where there's like this high traffic Sasquatch experience that people were talking about, and you just start correlating some of the dots. But diving into another fascinating story, because I'm sure that you probably know a lot more about it than I do. But since I brought it up, if you wanted to kind of dive into the Leatherman a little bit, you made it sound like he's somebody that you probably dived into in your book a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is one of the ones that's a true mystery, which is a rarity. Again, like I said, even though these folks are from the 1800s, we can find them on the census. We can find them here and there. If they got married, we can find the marriage records. Sometimes death certificates, rarely birth certificates, but I think we did find birth certificates for one or two of them. So, people do leave a mark, but the Leatherman did not. He appeared one day in, let me see here. I think it was in the 1860s. 1858, he appeared. No one knows where he came from. He just appeared. He wore a leather suit. And sometime around 1883, he began making this clockwise circuit through New York and Connecticut. So he walked about 10 miles a day in heavy boots. He made his own boots, wooden soles, so completely inflexible. So basically, he's stomping for 10 miles a day. There's no flex in that. His suit weighed something like 60 pounds. He wore it winter and summer, extremely hot in the summer, cold in the winter. Leather is not warm without fur or something underneath it. But he did not have that. It was sewn together patchwork from the top of old boots. Like he would find boots and cut the tops out and he sewed this whole patchwork leather suit. And very, very little is known about him. In the 1880s, a New England newspaper published a story by W.A. Salson entitled Mystery Solved. And that claimed to tell the true story of the life of the Leatherman. And they said his name was Jules Bourgelat. Jules Bourgelat. He came from France. He had fallen in love with the daughter of a leather merchant. And that guy put him in charge of not only his leather business, but his investing. And he lost all the guy's money and the leather market tanked. And the guy said, you're not going to marry my daughter. And he goes off and ends up in America. I don't know if he didn't have any money, how he would have gotten from France to America. But so the story went, and walked this circuit as in his homemade leather suit as punishment, sort of penance for what he did and for his lost love. Very interesting and romantic story which happens to be all false, all made up. At some point, someone found a note from the author of the original story where he admitted he just made it up. The problem with that is it was printed in a newspaper, and once things are printed, they become in some way fact. I ran into this with the Toad Road legends on the internet I was talking about earlier. Many people today will tell me, I've been out there, I've seen the ruins of the insane asylum. No, you haven't, because there's never been an insane asylum out there or anywhere else in York County, Pennsylvania. But people will insist it's true because they read it somewhere. Well, the same thing happened with him, with the Leatherman. And that story was reported as his life story in the newspapers up until the 1980s. They were still reporting it. His tombstone used to say Jules Bourgelat on it. That was not his name. The only thing we know about him is that he spoke French. He had an accent. That doesn't mean he came from France. He could have walked down from Canada, for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind to children. He did not speak to them much, but he was very kind to them. He did not beg. On his circuit, people would offer him food, and if someone at a house had previously someone at this house had previously given him food or tobacco, he would stop there again. But he did not beg. He very much kept to himself. He slept in a series of caves and lean-to shelters on the circuit, and just walked around and around. And he was so consistent that farmers would plant according to when he showed up. He was like clockwork. But that's it. That's all we know. Eventually, he got a form of cancer in his lip. You can see in some photos, his lip's swollen. And it was so bad that people tell stories about how he would eat, as he would mix everything into his coffee, because he couldn't really chew it up. And he would put a piece of leather over his lip and sort of like to protect the lip, and then pour his food in and drink his sustenance, basically. Eventually they find him dead in one of these caves. They bury him, and they put, like I said, for a while it was just like a marker on his grave that didn't say anything, but eventually somebody paid to have a stone that said Jules Bourgelat. About sometime within the last 10 years, I forget exactly when it was, they exhumed him, and they were going to do a DNA saying one of his remains and figure out, if they could, who he was. Well, he was completely returned to the earth. There was nothing in his grave but a few coffin nails, obviously a wooden coffin that had it all rotten away. So they reburied it and gave him a new tombstone, and which just says the Leatherman now, appropriately. So that's it. That's all we know about him. He had a scapular on and a Catholic prayer book, in French in his pocket when they found him. So he was Catholic. He would turn down meat on Fridays. So we know he was Catholic, and that's about it. We don't know his name. We don't know where he came from. A true mystery, and one that has lasted through time, and he will always be a mystery. We'll never know anything more about this guy. So it's pretty amazing. And they have the Leatherman race up there. There's several Leatherman caves that you can visit in New York and New England. So he's really left his mark on the area, but complete mystery.
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And now back to the show.
Say everybody likes to have that love connection with why people do these interesting things, because you have Coral Castle. There's obviously a connection with that, and I don't remember the guy's name exactly, but there was a guy who used to collect a bunch of like old random parts of things, and I think it was near the Great Depression, and he built this like castle type house thing in the middle of nowhere, and of course that one was also linked to a love story. So I think it's just people like having that linked into why people do these fascinating things. But looking at it from another perspective, at least for like the Leatherman, maybe some of these other hermit types, back in the day, people didn't have as much of an understanding of, some mental illnesses possibly. So,
True.
People wonder why people do these weird things where they're, extremely punctual about when they walk around this line or why they walk in this circle every single day. And, looking at the context now, maybe it makes a little bit more sense, but, maybe a lot of these hermit types, it wasn't that they didn't necessarily want to be around anybody, so to speak, but rather that, they had these issues and people just didn't understand them. So they figured that the best thing that they could do is just kind of go off by themselves. And you kind of add that view into it and almost makes the story a little bit more sad. So I guess that's why you got to kind of flip the folk story and add the love component to it, of course.
And that became a trope, the love story thing. But several of these guys were Civil War vets too. I think there could be a PTSD component to them, just like, I'm out, I'm done. But I think that it's very easy. And like I said, it became a trope that I had to address several times in the book. Like, they said this guy, and some of them did. Some of them it was lost love that drove some of these guys to become hermits, but not all of them. And a lot of them, they just wanted to live alone, for whatever reason it was. And it could have been mental illness in some cases. I believe it was in some cases, PTSD. And some people just want to live alone, though. Some of these guys were quite happy just living alone. They just wanted to live alone.
I mean, a lot of people wish they could do that nowadays, but it's not as easy as it was back in the day because, you can't live off grid without it being illegal. You can't just disappear like that. Like, I'm sure that there would be a lot more of this nowadays if it didn't end up resulting in all of the issues with like homeless stuff now where people can't get proper care or people aren't kind enough to, like this guy, for example, the Leatherman, somebody walks by and they hand him food or they give him tobacco. Like the same process wouldn't be done nowadays. Like people don't care as much. And you wouldn't see this reoccur again anytime soon.
It could not in the numbers that, like I said, I had to narrow it down. There were so many hermits. I had to narrow it down. And I think really, back then, late 1800s, early 1900s, every town had a newspaper, even almost like the smallest towns had newspapers. And they were always looking for human interest stories. And eventually they're going to get around to, there's that weird guy who lives alone up there. What's his story? So there's the stories. There's tons and tons of hermit stories out there. The way I narrowed it down was based on my photo collection. I was like, okay, this gives me something to, a way to narrow it down and, people can actually see these folks. But I think it was much more prevalent back then for many reasons. But a big part of it was the way we deal with property rights was different. We're so litigious these days. People just sue over anything, and they're afraid of getting sued over anything, right? So there's a cave in Irving, Massachusetts. You can visit it today. It's called the Irving Castle. And a hermit lived there, and he came from Scotland, he was a hermit in Scotland and ended up over here and became a hermit and lived in that cave. Now, that was on somebody's property at the time. Now it's in a state park, but at the time it was on somebody's property. And the guy found him, and the guy said, "Oh, you're not hurting anything. Go ahead and live in the cave. I don't care." That would never happen today. Never happen today. And there's lots of things like that where there was state land or something that these guys just built a cabin on, and the state's like, "Well, he's not hurting anything. Just let him be there." Never happened today. Could never happen today. So yeah, there was sort of a golden age of hermits, then, and it could not happen today, and at least not in the same way. You hear occasional hermit stories come up. There was a guy in Maine a few years ago that was living off grid and breaking into people's cabins and stuff and only taking food. But they eventually caught him and, wouldn't let him be a hermit, basically. You can't do it these days in the same way.
Yeah, I've talked to a few people that live, quote, off grid, and they say that you have to have one hookup to legally be able to exist there. And even if you don't necessarily use it, like I've heard of a few guys that'll like just run power to literally just run one light, and then everything else they'll run on solar and everything. But yeah, if you're not running with at least one thing hooked up, be it water, electricity, something, then they're going to come in and they're going to flush you out. Like they don't care if it's like your property, you can own the land, but you have to have some type of a hookup. Otherwise they won't let you legally live there.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah. It's just red tape everywhere.
Yep, of course. A lot of bureaucracy, and it's purposefully done, of course, because the other issue is, if they weren't so bureaucratic, about all of this type of stuff, then maybe the homeless problem wouldn't be so bad, because then people could say, yeah, go live on the cave in the back of my property. I don't care. Or somebody could simply just, build a bunch of little tiny homes in the back of their property and say, like, have at it. Like, a lot more opportunity,
Yeah. Things are just, litigated to death. And like I said, it's such a litigious society we live in. I hate no trespassing signs. I hate them. I wish we had property laws like Scotland, right? It's like you're free to roam. The basically close the gate behind you so the cows don't get out. That's beautiful to me. But we're so litigious here. I also understand why there's no trespassing signs, because if you break your ankle over there, you go, "Oh, I broke my ankle." Over here, you break your ankle. "I'm suing that guy. I broke my ankle on his property." That's ridiculous. So I wish we had more reasonable property laws here, but we would have to get rid of the litigious state of our society, I think. Yeah, stop suing each other over everything, and that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, even just people being respectful of other people's land, that's always the other problem too, is because you open the gates like that, and next thing you know, you got a bunch of dudes that are going to come into your property every weekend to hunt and stuff like that, and it's like they're not taking care of your property, they're throwing a bunch of cans and everything out back there. So that's the other hard component about it, is that you also need to have at least a group of people that would have enough respect for other people's property that they wouldn't just say, "It's not my property, not my problem," and just trash it.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But it's kind of starting to wrap up towards the end. I know that you had a few different books that you mentioned, including that last one that we were just talking about. But if you wanted to run through a list of your books, let everybody know where they could find them at and what exactly they might dive into with each of them. Kind of spotlight them up a little bit.
Sure. My first book is called Beyond the Seventh Gate. That's the one about Toad Road. That's really where I break down the legend and then tell the true story. I kind of debunk some part of the book, debunking the nonsense, and then say, but wait, weird stuff does happen out there. And then I get into the weird stuff that really does happen out there. I did a follow-up on that called Don't Look Behind You, which is experiences people came to me after the first book and told me about. And then I added some of my own experiences to it, like finding the skull I was talking about. So that's Don't Look Behind You. I have the two historical Bigfoot books, Bigfoot in Pennsylvania and Bigfoot West Coast Wildman. West Coast Wildman covers California, Oregon, and Washington State. Where the Footprints End, High Strangeness, and the Bigfoot Phenomenon. There's 2 volumes of that. Volume 1 is folklore, and Volume 2 is evidence, although there is evidence in Volume 1 and folklore in Volume 2. We just we had to figure out a way to break it up somehow. The Witch Cloud is a book about 2 haunted bridges in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and the strange stuff we experienced when we were looking into that. I have never minded the loneliness. Hermits and Their Story is my newest book. That's, again, biographies of hermits. And I'm probably missing something, but I think that's it.
And just for the sake of it, too, you seem like you're ultra fascinated with diving into these hermit stories. Is there another one on the horizon or another book that you're working on that might be just around the horizon?
Not on hermits. I'll do another hermit book maybe someday. Like I said, it just took me. The research was intensive, and it was hard. It was very, very hard research to do, especially while I'm running a podcast. And
real people, you want to tell their story correctly. That's the hard part about it. Like Sasquatch, there's nobody that's going to get mad at you, or a family that's not going to get mad at you for not telling their story right. You know?
Yeah. So, and like I said, like a lot of these folks were lost, and there's the idea of a second death. Like people die once, and then they die again when everybody forgets them. And I felt like a lot of these folks, I was finding them, saving them from that second death and telling their stories again after many, many years. So the weight, the importance of it was hung on me. But we'll see. I'll get there, eventually, probably, and do another volume of that somewhere down the road. But no, I'm working on another Bigfoot book and a couple books on Pennsylvania folklore, and then a different kind of thing about some of my experiences on a very, very strange property in Indiana. And I'm not ready to really announce what that's about yet, but that's coming in the future.
Well, there might be a good opportunity to hopefully have you on for another round at some point, because this was definitely a fun conversation, and you're always welcome to come back on the show.
Thank you.
Stay tuned, guys. This is our last break. But if you enjoyed the show and you think I deserve it, then please leave a review or rating for this show on iTunes, Spotify, or any other podcatcher you happen to use. Your continued support is what makes the show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. So thank you. Now feel free to skip past these ads so we can get back to the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it. But before we start wrapping up completely, I always like to wrap up with words of wisdom. So if there was any words of wisdom that you might want to bestow on the listeners today, what might it be?
Oh my gosh. Let me think. So I think we are put here to create, and that can be books or music or illustrations, or it could be cooking or a podcast or, whatever it is. I think we are put here to create, and, when it says the Bible, like, God made us in his image, I don't think for a second we look like God. I think the way we are like God is that he was a creator and we are creators. And that's what separates us from everything else on the planet. So I think people should find that thing that they like to create, whatever it is, and pursue that. Because I think that's what we're probably here to do.
Ain't that the truth? I mean, maybe that's what all the interest is with all this extraterrestrial and all of this weird spiritual stuff, that the fascination with humans is the fact that we can create. We might be the only ones that can create to the extent that we can, but always definitely something to think about. But if anybody really, really enjoyed this conversation, they wanted to hear some more about you diving into all of these fascinating stories and all the different stuff that you dive into, where might people be able to find your podcast, and where might people be able to find you if they might even have some stories they want to share with you, or even some hermit stories that might connect in with some of the stuff you've been talking about?
Sure thing. Strangefamiliars.com. That's my podcast. All that contact information goes to me there. You'll find links to my Etsy shop where you can get my books. The books are also available Amazon or wherever you buy books, all that. But it's strangefamiliars.com. It's like all in one location for everything me.
Well, man, like I said, I appreciate you making the time to come on today. It was definitely a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you sharing your stories and sharing a lot of the stuff that you dived into. And I'm really looking forward to next time we get to come back around to it, man.
Well, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to show some love, smash that follow icon and share today's episode with a friend. Grassroots support from listeners like you is exactly how this show grows. So thank you. And if anyone would like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can get a hold of me through email, which is inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you can get a hold of me through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that I'm the most active on. Or you guys can also get a hold of me through the submission forum, and of course that is available on the top of the link tree. And the last way you guys can get a hold of me is through the hotline number. You guys can text or call that, whatever happens to be easier, and that number is 313-364-1551. And that's also available down in the show notes so that you guys can find it quick and easy. And if you guys got some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends of the show, I Know Squatch, Snelly Out Natural Products, Cryptotheology, and Big Ape Threads, and our friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available. More information on those, of course, is available down in the show notes. And every single thing that I mentioned throughout the show is all available on the link tree, which again is also available down in those show notes. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed today's conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with the mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities,